Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, November the 26th, 2025. It's getting rather boring with these trines. There have been a lot of trines and grand trines recently, and today we have another grand trine. We've got Venus trine Jupiter. We've also got Venus trine Saturn. So another grand trine in water signs, and it's something I do have to talk about. In particular, the fact that we've got Venus trine Jupiter. So Venus and Jupiter are, in theory, the two most fortunate planets. Jupiter is the greater benefic. Venus is the lesser benefic. You put them together in a trine aspect, and you would have expected, at least in theory, some great results. And this is really something we need to think about. And at the end of this video, I'm going to be looking in general at the Grand Trine involving Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn, but in particular, I do want to look at the Venus-Jupiter trine. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, November the 26th, 2025, and here is the chart for today, set for noon New York time. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So as far as this chart is concerned, moon is right in the middle of Aquarius. So all of us have got a moon in Aquarius day. We don't have to think about the moon going into Pisces. It's all about moon in Aquarius, and the moon is in an air sign. It's in a sign that's often connected with ideas, but not just any idea. It can be very independent-minded, the moon in Aquarius. People like to do things their way, and once they decide that something is right, that they want to think things out in a particular way, then they're just going to want to carry on with it. And so with that moon in Aquarius, don't be surprised if there is, a fair amount of, stubbornness flying around. And, additionally, we have got the moon making a sextile to Mars. Moon sextile Mars is a pretty good aspect, and it allows us to get on with it, to proceed with our agenda, and we can be dynamic. Though interestingly, Mars is making a conjunction to true black moon Lilith. So moon making a sextile to both Mars and true black moon Lilith. It could be that we can harness our power. The power of Mars conjunct true black moon Lilith is not necessarily totally dramatic. It's not necessarily about explosions. It could be about the secret power. But I wouldn't say that if it wasn't for the fact that true black moon Lilith is involved, and there could be something quite unconscious about the way Mars is working. So someone might demand attention, and it might all be very straightforward, but you always have to think about motive, because in the shadows is lurking black moon Lilith, and black moon Lilith can prompt and whisper in strange ways, and it sort of represents the call of the unconscious, maybe. And aside from that, we have Venus making trines to Jupiter and Saturn. So Venus in Scorpio is trine Jupiter, trine Saturn. Effectively, there is a grand trine in water signs. Venus is on the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint. And so something is moving, something is coming together. And the question is, how do we align ourselves to all of this? Is this combination optimistic or is it pessimistic? Do we focus on Venus trine Jupiter or do we focus on Venus trine Saturn? I think that Venus trine Saturn is sort of more down to earth, obviously, from Venus trine Jupiter, and maybe the role of Saturn is to discipline Venus trine Jupiter. because Venus trine Jupiter, it's a great aspect. It's generous, it's friendly, it can be warm, and sometimes it can get out of hand. And maybe that's Saturn's role, to make sure that it doesn't get out of hand. But overall, I'd probably see this Grand Trine involving Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn as being quite favourable. Maybe we can bring something together, something that might be chaotic, that might not necessarily be going anywhere unless we make a real effort to control it. So that might be how this Grand Trine in water signs works. So that's the picture for New York. If we set the chart for Sydney, Australia, we get this. So here's the chart. Here is the chart, and the moon is just earlier in the sign. That's all. The moon is still in Aquarius. So if you are in Australasia, don't expect there to be huge differences, in Australasia compared with, say, the United States. Moon is quite close to the sextile of the sun. So, moon sextile sun is, it's a great aspect. It's about harmony. It's about things being balanced. And so if you are in Australasia, maybe the moon sextile sun is going to be more important than moon sextile Mars. So probably in Australasia it's going to be a calmer day than, say, in the US and other parts of the Americas. And maybe you should be looking for sort of oneness, and looking for the similarities between you and others, and where is the common ground. And I think that is something you can find in terms of the group, but also perhaps in terms of particular relationships. And then there is the heliocentric view. Well, that is the geocentric view, but let's just switch to the heliocentric one. So here's the heliocentric chart for today. So as far as what's happening, just a reminder, Saturn and Neptune are getting closer and closer to one another. Saturn is now sort of 16 and 9, about 25 arc minutes from Neptune. So, we're feeling the uncertainty. All of us are feeling that uncertainty, that things can't, entirely be taken for granted, and, things could go wrong. But we mustn't allow our fears to distract us. I think that, the fears that the Saturn-Neptune conjunction might describe, they may feel very real, but are they real? I think in most cases, probably not. And we've been talking about trines, and Mercury is starting to make a trine to Venus. It's also starting to make a conjunction to Jupiter. So there you can see Mercury is now 8 degrees from a conjunction to Jupiter, and it's just 3 degrees from a trine to Venus. It's kind of interesting in a heliocentric chart. You cannot get a Mercury trine Venus in a geocentric chart. Just can't be done. But in a heliocentric chart, you certainly can get Mercury trine Venus. And this aspect can very much facilitate communication. And it's further helped by the fact that Jupiter is kind of involved. Venus and Mercury are both applying to aspects of Jupiter. So there could be an overall sense of optimism, and there are always ways of talking and communicating and getting on with people. So that's pretty much it with the heliocentric view. Mars is making a trine to Chiron. So Mars is at 23:47 Sagittarius. That's 1.5 degrees off a trine to Chiron. So with Mars trine Chiron, some of us may feel we want to do things differently. The old ways may just feel a bit tired. And, what we don't like is people being too concerned about agreement. Agreement can be a problem. If everyone is agreeing with each other, it really is boring. And sometimes it can be a good idea to just stir things up, to look at the differences between people. And yeah, an argument can be useful, though you don't want to take that too far. But just remember that Mars is trine Chiron. Chiron is the maverick. Chiron likes to do things differently, and Mars wants to assert itself in such a way that it really gets noticed. Now, this is a heliocentric trine, so maybe you don't have to be influenced by it, but if you want to be influenced by it, if you just open your heart to the cosmos, then you might see that you have an opportunity to do something which is very different, which is a real representative of your fundamental originality. So now it's time to look at things from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, November the 26th, 2025. Aries. Probably Aries, you're feeling quite gregarious and sociable. You enjoy other people's company, and if you want to be in touch with anyone who you maybe haven't been in touch with for ages, now might be your chance, even though Mercury is retrograde. So, just because Mercury is retrograde doesn't mean that communications have to come to a complete halt, and they really don't. And at the moment, I think that you can project yourself, extremely well. And, one reason for this is that the moon is in Aquarius. Another reason is that moon in Aquarius is making a sextile to Mars. So if you want things to happen, if you feel that it's all getting a bit boring, then your own conscious actions can make all the difference. But that doesn't mean that you have to just be sort of acting on the surface, doing this, doing that, being very sort of influenced by concrete material events. That's not just what it's about, because Mars is making a conjunction today to true black moon Lilith. And, this conjunction between Mars and true black moon Lilith, might indicate, Aries, that you're putting your energy into interesting things. True black moon Lilith represents, quite a dark force, not necessarily a bad force, but something that is not immediately seen, and it might represent or appear to represent something that could be quite evil. I don't think it is evil, true black moon Lilith, but it's something ever so slightly disturbing. And perhaps the challenge with Mars conjunct true black moon Lilith is to really try to understand something, like never before, and to go into the depths, perhaps think about the past, and once you've made the connections, and perhaps helped by true black moon Lilith, you're in a better position to take action, because you know that there are no longer any surprises. And so I do think that this moon sextile Mars can be a real force for good. You have to be realistic, and you also have to be in touch with things which very often are but under the surface. But if you ignore them, then they just fester, and they manifest in ways that you hadn't imagined, you hadn't expected. And I think it's going to be difficult to really benefit from that. In fact, it could be a big minus in your life if you just follow something and just become an observer, and you kind of shy away from the darkness as represented by true black moon Lilith. But if you embrace it and you see where it's taking you, where it's elevating you on a spiritual level, I think that you can really make the most of things. And aside from that, we do have Venus making a trine to Jupiter, also making a trine to Saturn, being part of a Grand Trine. And that might mean, Aries, that you should spend some time thinking about what other people are doing, what people are trying to put into practice. And you might underestimate someone. You might think that what they're doing is going nowhere, but it may be going somewhere. And so do keep an eye on what other people are doing. They could start something that could be very difficult to stop, for better or for worse. Taurus. In America, it's the run-up to Thanksgiving, I think. Thursday is Thanksgiving, and it's difficult to avoid it. And if you're an American Taurus, well, like everyone else, you might be sort of wrapped up in the Thanksgiving preparations, whatever they might be. I mean, although I'm in America, I don't really understand Thanksgiving. Is that just out of studied ignorance? No, I wouldn't have said so. I mean, I think that it's a very American thing, but I'm perhaps rather distant from it, maybe. But I understand that it's important, and of course, it's becoming important not just in America. I think that I read somewhere that people are celebrating Thanksgiving and Black Friday in the UK. I mean, American customs, do spread. But as far as what it means for you, Taurus, I would probably suggest that you don't get too wrapped up in it, at least not until the last moment. I mean, you've got, the moon, the moon in Aquarius, and it's a good place for the moon to be Aquarius, especially if you're a Taurian. You have an idea about what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish, and you're capable of being fairly independent-minded about it. You have a clear idea about how you like things to sort of pan out, and if you keep going, and if you're prepared to bring to bear deeper resources. The moon is not it's in Aquarius. It's also making a sextiles to true black moon Lilith and Mars, and so maybe you can just tap into some really quite incredible powers. Perhaps they're emotional powers, something that is almost like your personal aquifer. Aquifer, this underground water that sometimes gets tapped, and you've got that aquifer of pure power, which I think that you can really bring out into the open, and I think that you can do a really good job. And furthermore, Taurus, Venus is trine Jupiter. I mean, need I say more? I mean, Venus is your ruler, and trine Jupiter does indicate that good luck may be on your side. I mean, I don't want to encourage you to get involved in speculative thinking, or to think that you don't have to do anything. You always have to do something, and you have to put in the effort. But if you're prepared to put in the effort, if you have an idea, you have something you really want to happen, and you are insistent, and you keep moving, you keep working, then Taurus, I think that you can really benefit from this. And so, as far as what I was saying about Thanksgiving, or suggesting about Thanksgiving, you shouldn't perhaps spend too much time if you're a Taurus from the United States, worrying about Thanksgiving, or allowing it to distract you, or to even sort of bring you to a halt. You have to think about what's important right now, and it could be that other people are distracted; they've got other things to worry about, and they're not providing any competition. So if there's no competition, Taurus, then you're free. You can do, to a great extent, whatever you want. Now, Venus is in Scorpio. It's in your opposite sign, and so with Venus moving through Scorpio, trine Jupiter, and in fact trine Saturn, part of a Grand Trine, I think that things really can move for you. And maybe things can move with the help and assistance and permission of another person. It's not all about you. And perhaps you're waiting for some kind of signal. You're waiting to be told that it's okay to pursue with whatever ambition you have. And, once you make a decision, you give it your best shot, then I think, Taurus, you can be really sort of pleasantly surprised, where, everything goes. And, one point about relationships, relationships might be complicated. Mars is making a conjunction to true black moon Lilith, and so Mars conjunct true black moon Lilith might indicate that there is another person who is quite intense in their own way, and maybe they've been keeping something back, but maybe also they feel that now is the time to reveal. I mean, it's not going to be necessarily easy for them, but do find out what people are planning on doing, what's on their mind, and you then are in a position to decide how best to respond. Do you want to get out of the way, or do you want to be part of another person's act of communication? Perhaps you can facilitate it, or maybe you can moderate it. It is up to you. But I do think, Taurus, that today you do have things to say, things to communicate, and also with Venus trine Jupiter, we should keep it simple, and it can just be lucky. So today, Taurus, you just might be luckier than average. Gemini. The moon is moving through Aquarius. That's a good place for the moon to be. When the moon is in Aquarius, if you're a Gemini, it can just feel that things are moving, things are happening, and additionally that there are things to get excited about. Excitement could be important, and you don't have to stick with what you know. You can explore. You can perhaps get in touch with people who have an alternative viewpoint, and sometimes it's okay to be contradicted. And I would have said, if you take something very seriously, that's all the more reason to be trying to understand what is being said, what other people are thinking. And it does matter to get an alternative view, and an alternative view can really help. And probably the main configuration of the day is a Grand Trine in water signs. You've got Venus trine Jupiter, Venus trine Saturn, and Jupiter and Saturn are themselves pretty close to a trine. And so as far as what that means, I think for you, Gemini, this Grand Trine is quite practical and down to earth. It gives you the ability to communicate pretty well, especially on an emotional level, and you understand what is important, what details matter, and you're able to talk things through. So if anyone has doubts, they're asking, do you really know what you're doing? Maybe what you're doing is unwise. You can smooth things over. You can explain that, your way is the right way. And in general, Gemini, I think that your ability to get on with people is really very good. You can be exciting. I don't think that's much of a problem, because there really are things going on. But at the same time, you are there, and being there means, well, in this context, it means understanding what needs to be done. And perhaps if there have been sort of minor mistakes, then I think that you can sort them out. And they're probably not your mistakes, especially if you're being called in to do something. Because it is at the moment Gemini, a time when you are effective. You know what needs to be done. You know what work needs to be done, and in your own quiet way, I do believe that you can be very impressive. And while you're being impressive, you can be quite charismatic and smooth. And I think that in most cases, people are going to listen to you. Cancer. Inevitably, Cancer, you might feel that you need some degree of distance. You can't be close to people all the time. And at the moment, Cancer, I think that you are very much going to value your own space. You want to be yourself, and you don't want to listen too hard to what other people are saying. I mean, people are always trying to say something. They're always trying to persuade you to do something that maybe you don't want to do, and so it would help if you were quite resilient, and you can listen to what other people are suggesting, but you don't have to follow it through, not at all. And so that seriousness and that suspicion, maybe, you kind of know, but not everyone can be trusted. Some people are up to no good. Some people may just be a waste of time. And so if you can be suspicious, but within a certain limit, I think that would be a good thing. You want to be suspicious, but you don't want to be so suspicious that you can't get on with everyone. You don't want to just assume that you're the only person that can be trusted. I mean, that is just not the right approach. And Cancer, if you can just bear with the complications, and and I think it could be complications today, not necessarily complications in the real world, but just now that you're seeing things in another way, you're seeing the possibilities, sure, but you're also seeing the ways in which something could potentially go wrong. And aside from that, we've talked about Grand Trines, and the fact that Grand Trines are not necessarily such an easy configuration, perhaps because things are just too easy. Because if things are too easy, then we get sloppy, we make mistakes, we don't realize that things are building up, and it's always a good idea to stop what we're doing every now and then, ask, is this really the right thing to do? Maybe we've completely misjudged it. So don't feel that you need to be tied up in knots. And if you can give yourself some variety over the course of the day, but not in a way that necessarily has to be shared. Do other people have the same priorities as you? Well, probably not. And that's just the way it is. Now, this trine between Venus and Jupiter. Jupiter is in Cancer. It's in it's in your sign, and Jupiter will be in Cancer for a long time, until I think it's the summer of next year. So it's something that you do need to track. And Venus is, Venus making that trine to Jupiter, that's a great aspect, Venus trine Jupiter. And it can allow Cancer things to just come together. You maybe just realize that you're good at something and you enjoy it, and it's potentially going to be a real part of yourself. So if there's some ability that you've been neglecting, or you thought that no one was interested, well, give it another go. Because with Venus trine Jupiter, you might find that things really do work very well for you. And your optimism can really see you through. Now, it is possible that some Cancerians might spend some of the day looking at the past, dealing with the past. Maybe there's something you've been developing or preparing, which has been put on hold, but now you're having another look at it, and you perhaps realize how much you have changed and how much you can encourage. Some people do need encouragement, and if you can provide that encouragement, I think that would be a good thing. And you have the ability to just understand how complicated things can be. That's what people want to hear, or rather, that's the response they're looking for. If you tell someone that everything is trivial, that there's nothing to worry about, well, that's not what anyone wants to hear. And if someone's got a real concern, they want the right advice, and they want someone, as they say, who can sort of come alongside them, perhaps on an emotional level. And Cancer, I do think that that's something that you very much can do. Leo, you at the moment seem to be in quite a friendly mood. You are thinking about other people, what their role is in your life, and the moon is currently in Aquarius. Of course, Aquarius is your opposite sign. So, when you've got moon in Aquarius, that does mean you've got to pay some attention to what other people are doing. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to completely do things everyone's way. It's just instead about just recognizing some of the pressures on you. And there may be moments during the day when you just don't have quite as much power as you'd expected. But, you shouldn't worry about it. I think that this is, by and large, a fairly temporary situation. And as far as your ambitions and your career, I don't know what you're doing today, Wednesday, but if you do focus on work and career, I think that you can really make some really good progress. I think that you are being at the moment quite focused on what matters. Maybe you're not sharing that focus, but it's still there. And with this focus sort of developing, over the course of the day, I think that people will notice it, and there'll be something about you, Leo, that in its own way is quite sort of charismatic, and it's perhaps about being able to meet people halfway. You're able to compromise up to a point. You're able to move the center of operations, perhaps, close enough to another person's view that they feel that they can sort of bridge the gap. And so if you want to get on with people, then I think you very much can. It really shouldn't be a problem. Now, if you are of a sort of insular nature, you value your own space and time, well, the picture might be a bit different. I think that with this Venus trine Jupiter, which I've just said it's a good aspect, but it might indicate that there are things you can do on your own, perhaps in your own home, in your own familiar space, somewhere you feel really comfortable. But you can do things which really are important, that can set you up very nicely in terms of the future. I mean, if you have a chance to work at home, for example, if you are working, then I think you're going to be more effective at home than if you have to go, I don't know, miles and miles, go into work, sort of wade your way through a traffic jam, whatever you have to do to get to work. If you have to do that, then that would very much blunt your impact. And I think as far as possible, if you can just be somewhere where you just feel good about yourself, where you feel secure, where there are no surprises, well, no surprises perhaps in terms of a work, but there could be other surprises. The surprise perhaps of your unconscious mind, just seeing something, seeing how things can develop. And I think that could, it's in its own way be quite exciting. Virgo. Right now, Virgo, the moon is in Aquarius, and moon in Aquarius. I think it's a good thing that the moon is in Aquarius, but from your viewpoint, you might not be especially impressed. With the moon in Virgo, there might be times during the day when things are pretty slow. They might feel slow. You expected you expected things to happen. You expected some excitement, and it all just seems slow. And if it is slow, you should probably be happy, because when things are slow, you're more in control. You don't have to act quickly to sort a problem out. You can take things one step at a time, and ideally you can spend some time thinking about what needs to be sorted out, what needs to be organized. Is something in the right place? And if something needs to be changed, then you are in a great position to actually make that change. And you do not have to do things on your own. I think that your ability to get on with other people at the moment is very good, and also there's your ability to be persuasive, to persuade people that you've got good ideas, that you're someone who can be a team player if need be. And I think all of that is going to be appreciated. And at the same time, we mustn't forget about relationships. There is a Grand Trine involving Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn, and at the very least, with this Grand Trine, I think that you're going to be able to take control of things. Other people have ideas. There are things they want to do, and at first you might be confused. You really don't know what you should be doing. Maybe at first sight you don't understand what people are doing, but if you make the effort, if you get close to the action, then you'll get a better picture, and you can then perhaps start to exercise a degree of control. And when I say control, I don't mean control like being like being a control freak, telling people what to do, insisting that they do things your way. No, it's not about that. But sometimes people do need a bit of leadership and direction, and I think that over the course of a day, that is something you really can provide, and it will be appreciated. I mean, that's what people are looking for. And so, you can, Virgo, demonstrate some quiet leadership. Libra. I have been talking about Grand Trines, quite a lot recently. This is the situation when we've got 3 planets in the same element, usually in the same element, and they are trining each other. And, we certainly have a Grand Trine today because you've got Venus in Scorpio, trine Jupiter in Cancer, trine Saturn in Pisces. Now, this Grand Trine certainly has an effect on you because, Libra, Venus is your ruling planet. So you've got Venus trine Jupiter, Venus trine Saturn. And, it could well be argued that Venus trine Jupiter is one of the best aspects in the book. I mean, Venus is, Venus your ruler, trine Jupiter, fortunate planet. You could say that a trine is a fortunate aspect. And so, Libra, there could well be opportunities to, create change and to act on the basis of maybe good emotional information. I mean, what is good emotional information? Sometimes things have to be backed up by your own feelings. Feelings matter. And right now, with Venus trine Jupiter, certainly I think that emotionally you're pretty well balanced, and that trine with Saturn, on the surface it might not sound great because Saturn, difficult planet, rather serious and wanting to be in control. But yeah, Saturn can provide some discipline, and sometimes Libra, you need discipline. Things need to be put under control. And I think that this Venus trine Saturn, this Venus Jupiter Saturn, Grand Trine, should just really help you, understand what is happening, and also just understand where discipline might be required. Now, this Grand Trine, from a Libran perspective, could be quite material. Now, that might sound strange because, there are no planets in Earth signs except for Uranus. If you could count that as a planet in an Earth sign, but Uranus is a transpersonal planet. It's not it's not a social planet. It's not a personal planet. So I think you could say that Uranus is pretty marginal, and so with no planets in Earth signs aside from Uranus, there is a danger, Libra, that you could find that you just are ungrounded, that you're floating free, and that's not really how you want it to be. But the Grand Trine with Jupiter trine Saturn, sort of Jupiter trine Venus trine Saturn. Well, with Jupiter trine Venus, that's a great aspect. Jupiter really elevates you and can make you lucky and can really help you to make the most of things. But then you've got Saturn, and Saturn is not the same as Earth. I must make that clear. It doesn't necessarily compensate for the fact there aren't any personal planets in Earth signs, but on the other hand, Saturn can provide some control and some discipline, and maybe at some level, Libra, that is really what you are looking for. But I'm not saying that it's going to be a boring day. I mean, after all, the moon is in Aquarius. Moon is in an air sign, and it's making a sextile to Mars. So moon sextile Mars, does mean that you are able to communicate fairly freely, and also you have a good understanding of your own interests, particularly relating to your work and your career, if that's appropriate, and if you want to move forward, with your ambitions. And I think you very much can, and you might not have to do everything alone, because the moon is making a sextile to Mars. Moon sextile Mars, I think that's a great aspect, and it's a very constructive aspect, and it could be that your communications with another person, or perhaps you have a conversation with them, can really be very useful, and it might at some level help you to form some kind of alliance, because Libra, you don't have to do everything on your own, and being a Libran, you don't really want to do things on your own. You want to get some support, and I think that over the course of a day, if you look hard enough, you can really start to see that support is available, and with this support, you can perhaps start to realize the full potential of this Grand Trine in water signs, which does involve Venus, your ruler, and Venus is making a trine to Jupiter, and Jupiter's lucky. So don't let the opportunity slip by. Scorpio, another Grand Trine. They've been cropping up in a way that is fast and furious, and we've had this trine between Jupiter and Saturn, which is sort of rather ongoing at the moment, and then every now and then another planet has come along to make the Grand Trine. So this, because you've got Jupiter in Cancer, you've got Saturn in Pisces, and so the other water sign is Scorpio. So it's when you get a planet at around 23, 24, Scorpio is when the Grand Trine starts to form. And we had the Sun in that position not so long ago. I think we had Mars there as well, but now it's Venus's turn. And so with this Grand Trine, which very much affects your sign, because you've got you've got Venus in Scorpio, and Venus in Scorpio is trining Saturn, trining Jupiter, and I think that with that Venus in Scorpio, you are probably pretty creative at the moment. I mean, you have all sorts of ideas. Venus is not just about relationships. It can be about what you feel you need to do and how you want to really bring to bear your creativity. And creativity can work on many levels. For example, it can be about art. It can be about just making things. And so don't be shy. If you want to make things, you certainly can. And this with Venus making a trine to Jupiter, your imagination is probably going to be on pretty good form at the moment. You'll have all sorts of ideas about how things could be, how things could turn out, and so let these ideas loose. And you don't have to worry about losing touch with them because of Saturn. So Saturn is very much there. It's a kind of a controlling influence, and so that's something to be positive about. And with this Grand Trine, it feels like the whole sort of energy of the cosmos, the energy of the solar system, is working in your favor, and that's great. I mean, you're not complacent. You understand that gains have to be seen through, and you're also aware that things aren't entirely straightforward. One aspect we have today is Mars making a conjunction to true black moon Lilith. So Scorpio, as far as what that conjunction means, true black moon Lilith is this point, which is what it represents is that part of the sky where, when the moon is there, it's furthest away from the Earth. So that's perhaps why it's linked with Lilith, this sort of darker force, the dark side of the moon, maybe. And so with Mars conjunct true black moon Lilith, well, it can just work in so many ways. I mean, you could see it in quite a spiritual way. You tuning into yourself and who you are and your memories, and accepting yourself as you are, and not being in denial or thinking, oh, it's bad to have particular thoughts and feelings. No, you have to have an integrated approach, and I think the message of true black moon Lilith is you've got to bring everything in. You can't just have parts of yourself which you refuse to recognize, because if there are certain things you refuse to recognize or discount, they can appear somewhere. I mean, they will eventually appear, but they could take a rather distorted form, and I don't think that that's what you want. And if you welcome true black moon Lilith into your life, then I think true black moon Lilith will probably make you more powerful and more lucky. And there is an alternative way of looking at it. I mean, you could, if you want to be really material about it, you might find that with Mars conjunct true black moon Lilith, you're just becoming aware of other people and other people's flaws and how base they can be, and they can be motivated by the most trivial things. For example, money. When money's involved, people go crazy, people do stupid things. And maybe that's what Mars conjunct true black moon Lilith is about, a financial situation or a financial issue where you take the view that someone has not been very sensible. They've maybe revealed too much. They've also behaved in a way which may be reprehensible. And so when you see what someone has done or what someone is contemplating doing, then you might be in a better position to take action. And I'm not convinced that you should be forgiving all the time. If you see someone doing something wrong, then it's very often the case that is about who they are. They can try their hardest to reform, but what are the chances? Once someone starts doing something wrong, something that is underhand, in all likelihood they'll just continue, and that's depressing. But it is the reality of human nature. But Scorpio, I'm not saying that everyone should be avoided. There's no doubt that today there are people out there who can be very useful. They can be your allies, they can be your friends, and they can be your confidants. Yeah, if you give them a chance. I mean, sometimes Scorpio, you don't want to give anyone a chance because you are completely focused on yourself and what you are trying to do. So that is something that Scorpio, that you need to think about. But overall, Scorpio, I think today looks pretty powerful. You've got the Grand Trine energy, and you have a chance to really see things at all levels and to see other people for what they are. And you can see that another person might have a side to them which it's not very pleasant. But that doesn't mean to say that you should just blast them out of your life. I mean, what you're looking at is a process by which you understand what people are like, and once you see the darker side of their personality, you're in a better position to handle them, and you can perhaps deal with them in a more honest and upfront way. Sagittarius, Mars is making a conjunction to true black moon Lilith. I do wonder about Mars making a conjunction to true black moon Lilith, but it has to be said. It really is a very close conjunction, and of course Mars is moving through your sign, and so if you think about what that means, Mars moving through your sign, I mean that it could be a time when you are you're really ready to stand up for yourself, and be clear about who you are and what you want. And don't forget the Sun is also in Sagittarius. So with Sun and Mars in Sagittarius, that looks good. You won't allow yourself to be steamrolled, and you will get your priorities right. But then you got true black moon Lilith, and I think that this true black moon Lilith, it could force you to have a subtlety that you weren't really planning on having. Sagittarius is not always a very subtle sign. It can be quite blunt. But with true black moon Lilith conjunct Mars, you kind of know that if you take something too far, it might just go in a direction that just is completely out of hand. You don't know when it's going to stop, where it's going to stop. And if you just pursue it to the end, then it just might be a difficult and messy situation. So perhaps Sagittarius, you should avoid making things too complicated. But I am absolutely not suggesting it's going to be a bad day. Jupiter is your ruler, and Venus is making a trine to Jupiter. Venus trine Jupiter, great aspect, and it's arguably one of the most fortunate aspects in the book, although at the end of the video I will be looking at some concrete examples of events taking place when Venus is trine Jupiter, and we see something quite interesting that may contradict an over-optimistic view of Venus and Jupiter, but still I think Sagittarius, this Venus trine Jupiter should work out pretty well for you, provided you just handle it in the right way. This Venus trine Jupiter is quite possibly not something that needs to be discussed. I mean, there are things that you would like to talk about, that you'd like to be open about, but Venus trine Jupiter is encouraging you to keep things to yourself. And by keeping things to yourself, you are giving a boost to your power. Because very often, as soon as something is revealed or it's talked about, it just loses it. It sort of drains away. The energy drains away. And so there may be Sagittarius things that are really crucial to you, like today, things that you really cherish and really value. And yeah, if you talk about them, then yeah, they lose power. And so it's perhaps okay to have a secret. And this secret could really develop into something. And maybe it's a time when things are developing in the darkness. And at the same time, Sagittarius, you are still going to be very definite. Okay, you might not reveal everything, but you can be very definite about who you are and what you want. And I think that in most cases, people will take you seriously, seriously enough for you to achieve, most of your short-term aims, or rather, anything you had aimed to do over the course of a day. I believe you can sort it out, provided you're realistic. I'm certainly not advocating that you drift off into flights of fantasy and attempt to do things which are impossible. But that is unnecessary. And if you just keep it simple and you keep active, then Sagittarius, I think that you won't be disappointed with the results. Capricorn. Well, Capricorn, it's a day which could well be important because we've got a Grand Trine. And this Grand Trine in water signs most certainly has an impact on you. Because Saturn, Saturn is your ruler. Saturn is trine Jupiter, and Saturn is trine Venus. And so, you really pick up on the Venus-Jupiter energy. So, as far as what the Venus-Jupiter energy is all about, did I say Venus-Jupiter? That's not what I meant. I meant to say, let me get this right. I meant to say, let's get this straight. I meant to say Venus, Jupiter. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Venus, Jupiter. Venus and Jupiter are, two planets which are very fortunate. There's no doubt about it. Jupiter is the greater benefic. Venus is the lesser benefic. And they're making a trine to your ruler together on the same day. And, this could be very uplifting. It might just make you think that things really are possible. Perhaps you thought they were not possible. You didn't have enough energy, but you have the energy and you have the possibility, and you can really see the chance. But that doesn't mean to say that you have to seize the chance at this moment. You can, to an extent, take your time. You don't want to take too much time, but over the next couple of days, you can certainly see the opportunity. And maybe things are made a little bit slower by the fact that Mercury is retrograde. I mean, Mercury is not going to stay retrograde for too much longer. And in fact, it won't be long before Venus is making a trine to Saturn. Mercury is making a trine to Jupiter and Saturn, and Mercury is involved in a Grand Trine. I mean, Mercury is already involved in the Grand Trine to some extent, but it's Venus that really is in focus. And I think, Capricorn, it may be worth your while making some effort to talk to people, trying to understand what people are doing, what they're planning, what they're thinking about, and the mere activity, the mere what's the way of putting it, the very fact that you are saying something, the very fact that you're with someone, that you're talking to them, that can make all the difference. And so a bit of socializing over the course of the day, even if you feel that that's not something you want to do, could pay dividends. And overall, this Grand Trine involving Venus, Jupiter and Saturn for you, Capricorn, I think it's pretty sociable. And I think that you can benefit from other people. People are there for you, and when you're with people, just things run quite smoothly. and you are not going to be in a position where things get out of control, because Saturn is your ruler, and Saturn aspecting Venus and Jupiter, you can get what you want out of a particular situation, but the moment things get out of control, or even start to get out of control, then you can take evasive action, or maybe you can bring things back under control. So overall, things do look pretty good, and Saturn, because it's trine Venus and trine Jupiter on the same day, it means that Saturn is on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. So Saturn on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint, overall, I would have said that makes you pretty lucky. And if you want something to happen, if you want something to go your way, Capricorn, I really think you can. I think you can make it happen, and make it happen much quicker than expected. And also, Capricorn, I don't think you have to put too much energy into the situation because of this Grand Trine. The great thing about a Grand Trine is that it's an aspect that's easy. One thing moves to another thing, with complete ease. So, there's no need to push yourself too hard. There's no need to exhaust yourself. In fact, if you try too hard to make something happen, it could backfire. But if you just use sort of minimum energy, then I think it's very likely that, that is enough. Aquarius. The moon is moving through your sign. Moon is right in the middle of your sign. I mean, noon New York time. Venus is the moon is at 1557 Aquarius, and so that's pretty solid. And so, at one level, Aquarius, you do have a pretty clear idea of how you want things to be, and you're not going to allow yourself to be manipulated, and your independence matters, and you don't have to worry about too much. And the moon in Aquarius is making a sextile to Mars, and while I've just said that your independence is important to you, that doesn't mean to say that you should be ignoring other people. Other people certainly matter, and if you make an effort to, really make your presence felt, I think that your energy will be reciprocated. So, don't feel that it's all about you. It can only be about you. Or you might perhaps be worried that if you engage with other people, you might lose something. You might lose your independence, or you might lose your ability to be a free actor. But, that's not true. I think that with this moon sextile Mars, you are really able to benefit from people, and they can provide you with the energy you need to really create real effects in the real world. And while this is happening, we have got a Grand Trine in water signs, and it's a Grand Trine that impacts Saturn, and of course Saturn is your ruler. So this Grand Trine, Venus trine Saturn, Venus and Jupiter trine Saturn, really works for you. And it's a great aspect, and it's very motivating, and it's probably quite lucky. Now, as far as what this Grand Trine is about, it may well be quite material. It might be about your ambitions, what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to organize. And I do think, Aquarius, that your organizational abilities are pretty good at the moment. And, also, what matters. You get your priorities absolutely right. And maybe it's because recently you have become more serious. You've known that, if you take a relaxed approach and you don't analyze things too much, well, things might go wrong. Because, you realize that things are complicated, or they could be complicated. And so with that approach, which is really quite realistic and responsible, you can really utilize the fact that both Jupiter and Venus, those two very fortunate planets, are aspecting Saturn, and it's not ill-disciplined, it's not chaotic. It's about focusing on what matters, what you want, how you need to safeguard your position, and it's all great. And specifically, it might say something about money. Maybe if the money has been bothering you, something might happen which just makes you more optimistic, makes you think, but hold on, money is available. It's not so difficult. And grand trines are about ease. You try a little bit, you put a bit of effort into something, and then you see the result. So do think about what it is that you want to achieve, and don't feel guilty about it. That is very important. If something belongs to you, if you feel you need to get hold of it, then you must do what it takes, within reason. And your actions today, I think that in most cases, are going to be, pretty successful. They're going to work well. Pisces. More stuff in water signs. It doesn't really stop, does it? Still, we've got Mercury and Venus in Scorpio. We've got Jupiter in Cancer, Saturn in Pisces. So if we look at those, planets from a traditional perspective, that means there are 4 out of 7 of the traditional planets are in water signs, and from a Piscean perspective, I would have said that is, good news. It does mean that things are moving, things are unfolding, at a good pace, and you do have your finger on the emotional pulse, and so you're not going to be neglected. Things aren't going to pass you by. You'll just understand, and on an emotional level, there's a lot of clarity. At least there should be clarity, and the reason for that is to do with Saturn. I mean, we've got this Grand Trine in water signs, but the key thing is that Saturn is involved in the Grand Trine, and Saturn, is in Pisces, and it's able to create a certain amount of discipline, and so that says something about what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve. And a serious approach can be effective, but you don't have to be too serious. And in particular, it's important not to try too hard. So if you're trying to create something, you're trying to create wonderful effects, be natural about it. Because if you push something too hard, it's going to break, or it could get out of control. You can get overkill. You think you're doing something simple and straightforward, and you create a chain reaction, and you just don't know where it's all going to lead. So keep it simple, and don't employ more resources than is absolutely necessary. And I'm thinking particularly of resources of emotion and energy. And you can be effective across the board in many different areas. And we have at the moment a rather interesting conjunction between Mars and true black moon Lilith. So Mars, true black moon Lilith, as a pair, well, it's energetic. There's something you want, there's something you're pursuing, but the question is, what is motivating you? And true black moon Lilith, you might think, is some sort of a darker force. It might even seem unpleasant, but maybe that's not what true black moon Lilith is about. True black moon Lilith is things that are building up in the unconscious, perhaps relating to the past, and at some level they are motivating you. And if you're able to put your energy into the achievement of something, it's not just about the present, it's about the force of the past and the force of your emotions, and together they are really making things happen, and things can really click together. And while you're doing it, you don't have to be open necessarily about what you want and what your aims are. You've certainly got aims, and you are ambitious, particularly now with the Sun and Mars and true Black Moon Lilith in Sagittarius, but you don't have to be entirely open about it all. And also in terms of your actions, doing things in a roundabout way, may not be such a bad idea. So you don't have to necessarily announce your presence and really just go for it, and insist that everyone takes you seriously, insist that everyone notices you. I don't think that would be a good idea. There's always an advantage in sort of not being noticed. It might be good for your ego being noticed, but if you're looking for results, Pisces, then it may be better if you just do things in a more sort of subtle and slow way. But it can't be denied, Pisces, that right now you do have a lot of energy. You're really sparking. It's all happening, and once you decide you want something and you give it everything, well, can you really be stopped? I mean, I don't think you can be. I think in some respects, Pisces, you're one of the most powerful of the 12 signs today, perhaps even the most powerful. And that perhaps is a testament to the Grand Trine in water signs. It really is helping. And Jupiter is tied up with this Grand Trine. So Saturn, and so you have the power of knowing what's important and being able to bring to bear the right level of control. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to switch to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 53, which is development. And this gives us the idea of gradually working towards something. Slowly, slowly. We mustn't be in a hurry. We will get there in the end. If we're careful and we take a step-by-step approach, and the image we get with this hexagram is of a bird flying higher and higher. On its journey, things are developing, all the time. And this hexagram, it has 4 moving lines. So 4 moving lines is quite a lot. Statistically, you would not expect 4 lines very often. And so this might indicate that today there are quite a lot of twists and turns. We're trying to develop something, we're trying to get something together, but there are happenings, and we change our approach, every now and then, and so that's how we do it. And so if we think about how this development might unfold, it might be, we start something, and and then the second line moves, and that suggests we get some encouragement. We get some support, and that's what we're looking for. If we're on a journey and we're trying to get something together, we want some evidence that we're doing the right thing, and then we get that evidence, and it's fine. And then we move on, and then the fourth line moves, and okay, we reach a certain point, and we're trying to sort of ground what we've done, and it's not necessarily easy. And the image we have is of a bird trying to land on a tree, and things just aren't in the right shape. The branches are just difficult. And I think this hexagram talks about geese, and so geese have particular feet, and they've got these webbed feet, and they don't fit around the right branch, so they have to find a particular branch which has got a particular shape. So it could be that at a certain point we're looking for a resting place, but we can't find anything easily, so we have to keep trying. But I think in the end, we do get what we're looking for. And then the hexagram develops further and the fifth line moves. And the fifth line is perhaps talking about the first real obstacle. We might just find that something we thought was going to be relatively quick takes a long time, much longer than expected. And we might think, are we ever going to get a result? Ever? And it's frustrating. And the symbol we have here with the fifth line moving is 3 years, nothing happens. Things do take 3 years. I've been doing this this YouTube channel. I started this channel in February 2023, so I'm coming up for my 3 years. And what have I achieved in 3 years? Well, I mean, that's debatable, but 3 years, it can be 3 years, nothing much happens, and then something does happen, something develops. So don't panic if things aren't working as quickly as expected, because there's just a delay, and that's perhaps the delay is the key point. It's that moment where it's so easy perhaps to give up. We think we've just put enough resources into it, and so let's just give up. But it might be, if that was the case, we'd be giving up just before we started to reap the first rewards. And then the sixth line moves, the top line moves. We've had this quite recently, and the top line means we really have got it together. And, we've got it together to such an extent that we've moved to the next stage, a different stage. And in terms of moving to a next stage, we're perhaps leaving some people behind because, it's time to move on. But moving on in a way that is really very fortunate and is commendable. We're moving on to a place where we can be recognized because we have, in the end, got it together. And so with those moving lines, we do move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 32, which is duration. Stick with it. Don't give up. Keep going. And if you keep going, it's going to be fine. Yeah, there might be moments when you want to give up, but I would not recommend that course of action. Of course, that depends what you're doing. But, overall, it seems that there's something you're involved in, something you're trying to develop. There'll be maybe moments where you feel quite good about what you're doing, but there are going to be other moments where it just seems that you're completely stuck. I'm not saying you're going to have to wait for 3 years. This is only a video for just one day, I don't know, 3 hours, whatever it is. So things could take their time, but just keep going. And I think that, in the end, you will be rewarded. And so now I want to finish with the Grand Trine, and in particular the fact that there's Venus trine Jupiter. So let's look at the chart for the exact moment of Venus trine Jupiter. So here it is. Venus trine Jupiter. There it is. This aspect happens London time at 4:31 p.m. on Wednesday the 26th. And so that means that if you're in the Americas, it would happen in the morning. If you're in Australia, late evening, perhaps into the 27th. But here is this trine between Venus and Jupiter. There's Venus at 24:47 Scorpio, and there is Jupiter at 24:47 Cancer, and Saturn at 25:10 Pisces. So Venus, having made the trine to Jupiter, it just moves on and makes a trine to Saturn, and so things are really coming together there. And if we're thinking about Jupiter-Saturn, you could think about the business cycle, about what's happening in the world, how optimistic people are, optimism, pessimism. I mean, that's what drives markets. and with Jupiter and Saturn trine, it's all finely balanced, isn't it? And it might well be with Venus trine Jupiter and Saturn that there could be a feeling of optimism. I mean, I know that Venus is trine Saturn, but it's also trine Jupiter, and it's not crazy optimism. It is tinged with realism, but many of us might feel that things really are coming together, that things aren't as bad as they seem, and this can relate to how one sees the market. So I've been thinking about the markets a lot recently. I mean, from an astrological perspective, and in terms of the period following the Jupiter Saturn conjunction. Remember, there was a Jupiter Saturn conjunction in 2020, and if you look at previous Jupiter Saturn conjunctions, very often the period, about 6 years after the conjunction, is often the time when people are most optimistic. Which would be a year ending in 6 or 7, like you were coming up to 2026. Or you might think about maybe 1986, or maybe 2006, early 2007, and early 2007. Of course, 2007 is when things really started to go wrong in the run up to the great economic crisis. And once that Jupiter Saturn has run its part, has just run itself through, has separates, maybe that's when the problems are going to start to emerge. My view is that as far as some kind of economic breakdown, it happens kind of between the trine and the opposition. Maybe it'll be, we can wait until the opposition, like in 1929, in the run up to the Jupiter Saturn and the Jupiter Saturn opposition, but maybe it'll happen earlier. But I think there is an argument to say that 2026 could be the peak, and that there is a lot more optimism to feed into the system here. And maybe with Venus trine Jupiter, Venus trine Saturn, there is a reminder here. And there's still scope for example, Donald Trump to do things to influence the market in a positive way. I mean, I'm not making any predictions about what the stock market is going to do, by the way. I'm just I'm sticking to the astrology, and always remember that this channel is just for entertainment purposes only. And so that is a way of looking at Venus trine Jupiter. I mean, it does balance enthusiasm and discipline. Are we happy, or are we realistic? And so I think that's a way of looking at it. But Venus trine Jupiter, I think there is an argument for looking at Venus trine Jupiter in isolation. Okay, I know it's linked with Saturn, but Venus and Jupiter are the two most fortunate planets. There is, Jupiter is the greater benefic, Venus is a lesser benefic. And so you would think that when Venus and Jupiter are trine, things really should work well. There is really scope there for being happy. That's what Venus and Jupiter are about, enjoying life. Maybe that's something we can do. And if we throw in Saturn as well, it might be about making something last. Saturn is a ruler of time. Okay, Jupiter is a ruler of time as well. Jupiter and Saturn are both for chronocrators, but Saturn is particularly connected with time, chronos. And so we don't want to have just a blast of happiness and then it just dissipates and goes away. We want it to last, and maybe that is a constructive role for Saturn as it is involved in that Grand Trine. And so there is the question, if we look at events which took place when Venus was trine Jupiter. When I say trine Jupiter, I'm talking about a trine with an orb of 3 degrees. That's my limit. I'm not looking at any trines which are out by more than 3 degrees. So you could say that Venus trine Jupiter is a good time to be starting something. So if you're starting an enterprise or a political party or whatever it might be, doing it while Venus trine Jupiter, while Venus is trine Jupiter, might be a good move. And from a German perspective, I believe that in the opinion polls, the party that is doing best is the AfD. The AfD, the alternative for Deutschland, or alternative for Germany, and of course the AfD is labelled as a far right party. I don't know what it means to be far right. It's certainly a right wing party. I don't know about far right, but it's doing well in the polls. Whether or not that will translate into actual electoral success, it might get banned before an election comes about. You've already had an AfD mayor not being allowed to stand because I believe he said some things about Tolkien. He said how AfD is, has a relationship to Tolkien, and he can, being a Tolkien fan, he can see the AfD and its somehow in Tolkien. I don't know about the details. So as far as the AfD chart is concerned, I believe it was founded on February the 6th, 2013. I don't know what time it was founded. I mean, I've just gone for 6 p.m. I think it was a Wednesday. So could people afford to take time off work during the day? Maybe that's not the right time. So Venus was at 5 degrees Aquarius. Jupiter was at 6 degrees Gemini. So potentially that is a good time to start a political party. Venus in Aquarius is quite political. I mean, it really is, because Venus in Aquarius almost certainly refers to its leader, or one of its leaders, Alice Weidel. I should have looked at her chart. I should have, to show you what I mean. So here's the horoscope of Alice Weidel, one of the AfD's leaders. And what is incredible about Alice Weidel and the foundation of the AfD is that Alice Weidel, have I pronounced that right? Weidel, yeah, I think it's not Weidel, it's Weidel, was born on February the 6th, 1979. February the 6th. And the AfD was founded on February the 6th. It was founded on her birthday. So really that Venus has got to be the woman in the party. That's her, the Aquarius, and it's trine Jupiter. So you can see in this chart that this was a great time to start a party. I don't know about the moon. I don't know when that meeting was. Maybe the moon was void of course in very late Sagittarius, or maybe it was in Capricorn. I don't know, but just looking at the Venus trine Jupiter, that is an example of doing something when Venus trine Jupiter, and the project working well so far. Of course, we don't know what's going to happen next. And as far as something else, well, you associate Venus trine Jupiter, I mean, theoretically, with good events. Of course, some people would regard the foundation of AfD as being a disastrous event, undermining German democracy and so on. I don't know. Don't think I would necessarily subscribe to that view. But there's no doubt that bad things can happen when Venus is trine Jupiter. I mean, a bad thing that happened was the American Civil War. Well, it was a bad thing because a lot of people got killed. Maybe the Civil War had to happen. But this is a chart for the beginning of the American Civil War, and Venus is at 14 Aries, Jupiter is at 17 Leo, and this may reflect my view that Venus does have a connection with war, and maybe the drums of war are beating with that Venus trine Jupiter. Especially as Venus is in Aries, that's quite an assertive place for Venus. So just because we think about Venus trine Jupiter doesn't necessarily mean that it need be a good event. This is an event. This is an event which killed hundreds of thousands of people. It was arguably the beginning of the first mechanized modern war. I mean, it was perhaps a precursor to the First World War in terms of military technology and what people were doing. Although I'm not a Civil War buff. So that's a way Venus trine Jupiter can certainly work. And talking about death, there's Diana. I mean, Diana's accident and Diana in the tunnel. So here's Diana's accident, and Diana, she's Venus trine Jupiter. A great day for a great evening for driving fast in a tunnel with a drunk driver. Venus trine Jupiter. Jupiter's right on the midheaven. I am sure that the death of Diana was connected with that Venus trine Jupiter. I'm really sure about that. Jupiter on the midheaven as that accident happened, and Venus in Libra. In many respects, that's Diana, as we saw in the AFD chart. The Venus in the AFD chart was Alice Weidel, I'm pretty sure about that. And in this chart, Venus is Diana. Venus looks good in Libra. Venus is trine Jupiter. But you could see this in a positive way, in a very kind of perversely positive way, because what this accident did was it made Diana not quite immortal, but it fixed her, aged 36. If Diana was still alive, she'd be coming up to her 60 next year. Her next birthday, she'd be 65. But no, we're not going to see Diana as a woman in her 60s, because she's forever going to be no more than 36 years old. And so that this event could have really, sealed her reputation, in the same way, like Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe and Diana died at the same age, almost exactly the same age within a couple of days. I think that Marilyn Monroe she was a day older than Diana was when the two women died. So Venus, that's a way in which Venus trine Jupiter can work. I mean, it's good for her memory and her legacy, but I'm sure that Diana would not have had that view. So we have to be careful with thinking that Venus trine Jupiter is always going to be a fortunate event. And another person who died when Venus was trine Jupiter was Epstein. We don't know what happened to him. Whether or not he killed himself, whether someone else did it. Still, at the time of Epstein's death, I mean, I've gone to 4:30 a.m., but Venus was at 16 Leo, Jupiter at 14 Sagittarius. And again, as with Diana, you could say that this sealed his reputation. He's still around, isn't he? I mean, Epstein, he may be dead, but he's still around. He's still ruining people's reputations. He's almost alive. Although I'm sort of thinking of sort of Vincent Price in what was it? The film called Return of the Abominable Dr. Phibes. He said something like, "You can't kill me because I'm already dead," when he was playing Dr. Phibes. So I don't know. That may be a way of doing it. I mean, maybe. Like Dr. Phibes, Epstein was already dead, but you can't kill him. It doesn't matter. He's there. He's alive. Venus trine Jupiter. So as an event, the death of Epstein, it just keeps going. It hasn't been forgotten. Venus trine Jupiter. So that's how Venus, how the planets might be working. And horrible things can happen when Venus trines Jupiter. We saw it with Diana. I mean, and then the Idaho murders, when Brian Koberger killed the 4 students. I probably talk about this event rather too much, but it was, it was really quite a big event, and it really captured the news flow. And Koberger killed those students when Venus was applying to a trine of Jupiter. Venus in Scorpio, trine Jupiter in Pisces. And just a reminder, Venus trine Jupiter is not necessarily a fortunate aspect. It's an aspect that involves the greater and the lesser benefics, but in terms of the actual events taking place when Venus is trine Jupiter, it can be events which capture everyone's attention, but they may not necessarily be good. And continuing on the theme of death and tragedy, there is the death of John F. Kennedy, the one who died, the one who was flying with his wife and his wife's sister, and when they crashed off Martha's Vineyard. I think he was flying at night, and he didn't really have the ability to fly at night, or the certification. I'm not sure about that. And Venus was trine Jupiter. Venus was at 2 degrees 9 Virgo. Applying to a trine of Jupiter at 2 degrees 36, and so that was the time when the plane crashed. I mean, was that just coincidence? I mean, in terms of the chart of this crash, if it's 9:41 p.m., we have true black moon Lilith on the midheaven. I mean, that's very descriptive. Flying at night. And Lilith is a being of the night, and Lilith on the midheaven, she makes her influence felt, and there is the crash. And when you've got Venus trine Jupiter, it depends on your perspective, doesn't it? I mean, Hitler came to power when Venus was trine Jupiter. So there's a chart of Hitler becoming chancellor. Venus is on the midheaven, trine Jupiter. So from Hitler's perspective, well, that was great, wasn't it? Look at that, Venus trine Mars. Hitler had a Venus-Mars conjunction in his chart, and so when Venus was trine Mars, and Venus was also trine Jupiter, and Venus was on the midheaven. So from his perspective, it was great. He was chancellor. He'd finally made it. But from everyone else's perspective, it obviously wasn't so great. And finally, I think the last chart is the inauguration of Franklin Roosevelt. Well, the inauguration, not the first inauguration. I'm thinking about the inauguration in 1941, because I think he was first elected in 1932. He became elected in 1933, and then this would have been his third and final term. Is that right? Yeah, his third and final term, and this is when he was inaugurated in January the 20th. So his first term, he was inaugurated in March, but they changed the beginning of the term, so he was inaugurated on January the 20th, 1941. And so here is the chart, and of course this was a very momentous inauguration. I mean, you could say that because of what happened in the next following 4 years, America became, well, it was already a superpower, but it really dominated the world under Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidency. And of course, he got involved in a war, which he won. And as a result of that war, that really gave a major boost to America's power. Of course, a lot of American soldiers died, but I think that doesn't necessarily take away, perhaps, from the eventual good fortune of it. But sort of more immediately, you had Pearl Harbor, but you do have Venus trine Jupiter and Venus trine Saturn. So this was not a grand trine, but because there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So I think that what's kind of interesting about this chart is that Venus is picking up on the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. That Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, it's these the rulers of time. They're telling you about the quality of the time. The beginning of the 1940s. Things were changing. Venus was picking up on it and trine Saturn. So that is the question. Was his presidency fortunate or was it not fortunate? Short term, it certainly was very unfortunate, but in the long term, maybe it wasn't so bad, at least from America's perspective. So those are a few thoughts on the Venus trine Jupiter, and I just tried to illustrate that we think about Venus trine Jupiter as being a very fortunate aspect, and maybe in a natal chart it is. I haven't looked at any natal charts. I decided to stay away from that, but for this video. But we think about it as a fortunate aspect. But in terms of the events, not always. And some very bad things can happen when Venus is trining Jupiter. And if that is the case, maybe we need to think again about what it means for Venus to trine Jupiter. What are these planets about? Are they just good planets? Well, I think that's too much of a simplification. I mean, I do think that Venus can be about war, Jupiter can be about exaggeration, and so there's perhaps more work to be done in this area. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, of course, super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.